Welcome to Who's There, our continuing exploration of what is within you, your motivations, aspirations, your capabilities, and how you define rewards in your life that can inform your organization's leaders for better outcomes.
So we're really pleased with the conversation we had with Erika Yuag from Microsoft. She works in a technical division, but on a mission of people empowerment. And I think what was fascinating was the alignment of her work with our theme of Who's There. So let me just ask you, Curt, what you thought was the big takeaway from the conversation that we had.
I picked up on three things that were, as you said, really aligned with the work we're doing with Who's There, as well as in some ways, even though Erika and I are in two what seem like very different spaces, I also think that we overlap a lot. So her focus on her background and the alternate path that she took compared to, say, the traditional paths that others may take to the positions that she's been working in. Her focus then on authenticity and the sort of necessity of authenticity, right? So it's not just that we're aiming for authenticity's sake, but it's necessary for specific outcomes. And that last word, outcomes, was she touched on really being focused on putting the outcome first. What's the outcome that we're trying to achieve? And then building a solution path around that. So those were the three takeaways I got. There was a lot more that we touched on, but
I think on authenticity, we talked about how does a person act in their life? It doesn't always fit in the work setting, but let's make sure that the way that person is can align with the framework and guardrails that are in an organization. And, her colleagues called her a challenger, which she kind of embraced at some point because they realized that she was going to look at her work down maybe a different path that wasn't linear, but rather how do I take in what my organization offers in front of me to improve my own journey. And it may zigzag before it goes straight.
Yeah, and as you know from our relationship and friendship, we've sort of grown over the last year or two. Authenticity is something I've been very interested in. It's important to me, but I'm also well aware that there's a public face that companies want to have, but then there can be tens of thousands of faces, every face being different within an organization. So trying to find that space for individual authenticity that's not going to adversely affect that public face, which again she touched on, I think quite well, is really the challenge that I think a lot of organizations are confronted with, particularly as they grow.
Yeah, so the final thought around that theme is that she sees her role as a connector, I'm thinking matchmaker. So it isn't that she's trying to shape or change people, she's trying to find how the right person can fit into a certain opportunity. So with that, let's hear what we learned from Erika. We're really pleased today to welcome Erika Yuag to our Who's There podcast. And by way of brief introduction, Erika's work world includes, and some external activities include focus on people development through talent, diversity, inclusion, learning, culture, and employee engagement. She comes to us by way of Microsoft as the senior business manager for the developer division, with former experiences with Symantec and Juniper Networks, and has a pretty important volunteer activity around the Soldier and Family Readiness Group, which I think is part of what our conversation will include today. So with that, I would like to just highlight one message you delivered to us that I think strings together how we're going to have a great conversation today. You had noted, how might we accelerate the matching of passion, meaningful change, and overall better satisfaction within and outside of organizations. And I think that statement that you made is, really resonates for me around our conversation of Who's There. So let me just turn it back to you, Erika, to offer up your own introduction if I left out anything important about your work.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert, and super glad to be here. Nice to meet you, Curt. And just for some context, growing up, I've always had a giant family. I'm Filipino, and I was born and raised in California. And so whenever we talk about, everyone in communities and coming together, it's really about that sense of belonging, identifying what paths you have available to really be at your best. And when I said the statement about matching organizations, actually matching people's passions with what can be possible in an organization, I really mean by understanding how you might use your organization as a platform to really express your purpose and achieve your life goals, and even your own personal passions. And so it's actually really cool because being at Microsoft, and it isn't anything new, you can find it out in the news, on the news or any kind of media posts, that Satya Nadella often shares that because our mission is around empowerment, he too also advises, how can you use Microsoft as your platform? And that really means that it isn't necessarily just on the corporations aspect to kind of enable that and drive it for you. It's really about a relationship and a balance between what I as an employee can do in this great company with a great mission. And so I'd like to also note, I am not speaking on behalf of Microsoft. I'm speaking on behalf of my own personal experience. And that is one of, I always find myself in situations of challenging the system. And I actually was given, and I don't know if it was necessarily good, but I was given the the label of being a challenger, and I just kind of went with it and embraced it. I'm like, yeah, that's what I do. And the way that happened was a few companies ago, I really found myself interested in learning more about the culture space, but not necessarily taking the paved path that was set forth by those before me to be successful in that career. And so I was always told, there's no way you can be an HR business partner. And I asked, why? They say, because you don't have the educational background, you don't have the years of experience, and just a lot of things of why not. And the question I always came back with was, why not? Like, not, why can't I do it? But more of like, why is it that there is only one linear path to getting to that position? And not only that, I was also questioning myself of, why is it that I only want to jump into position to position? Because that doesn't necessarily mean it'll enable me to do the things I want to do and grow in my career. And so going into my personal experience around really how I've taken charge of my passion, really understanding what are the opportunities I can create or partner with others to enable opportunities to really enact those passions, enact my purpose. It's really about how you share it outwardly with others. And even the clear example of the role that I'm in today, this is the first time I'm ever in a role that's outside of HR. And it somehow happened by accident, but it also happened because I put out that interest to not just my manager, not just my hierarchy chain, but to my peers, to my colleagues, the people I've made relationships with. And it led me to, it was like somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who met my current manager. And he reached out to me and he said, hey, I heard you do stuff in culture. I heard you've expressed your interest in really creating more tangible practices so that culture change isn't just made by, people who are assigned to those roles. And I also like to side note, culture is owned by everyone and not just a particular role. So however we show up is contributing to current state. And so for the three of us on this call, we are contributing to this current state that is the perception of our experience, the lived experience, and therefore the macro culture that we're creating in this dynamic. So same thing in the corporation. I expressed that these are some of the things I really want to do, which is help to drive culture change at the grassroots level, to empower people to essentially empower themselves. Like, it's something that they can see and spark if they have interests and passions. Like, go for it. Don't wait. And so going back to the example with my manager, my now manager, he heard about me. He heard about my interest because I communicated it to as many people as I could. And not in search for a job, just more of, this is what I care about and this is what I'm interested in. And I love doing this stuff around learning and community and culture change, and working with change agents. And then long story short, we had a conversation and he's just like, I really like the way you're approaching culture change, that it isn't just a top-down approach. It needs to be, middle out and bottoms up. Are you interested in looping? And I was like, for what role? He's like, a culture PM role. And I said, have you ever thought about not calling it that? He was like, what? I was like, I'd be interested in looping if you don't call it a culture PM role. And he's like, why? And I was like, because you're inadvertently setting that role up for failure. And you're also creating the assumption that that person's going to save the day and own culture. And I was like, and I'm not down for that. And he's like, okay, so what do you recommend? I was like, keep it super vague. He's the chief of staff of the division. So I said, what does the chief of staff do? He said, well, it enables business success, operations, and, provides the resources for the division to run successfully. Like, great. Let me be an extension of that from a people and culture perspective, but don't call me culture PM. It's like, okay, And so when we started, I was like, please don't box me in, because as soon as you box me in, people will only see me as like, oh, Erika does all the trainings and Erika does all the feel good stuff. Oh, inclusion. Oh, that's Erika's job. And it's like, no. Right off the bat, I was like, I just say Erika's acting as a consultant. She's working on the strategy. She's helping to create organizational effectiveness. And what she's able to do is observe and understand the current dynamics and then provide recommendations systemically to see the changes that we want to see. And he's like, okay. And so when I started working with the different groups, they're like, what do you do? I was like, consultation, strategy, that kind of stuff. And he was just like, and a lot of people are just like, yeah, okay, that's cool. And so it really opened up the environment for me to kind of just jump in and out of teams, observe. And then I was able to really understand the system, how things actually work. And then what are the interests that people have, and how do I facilitate that matchmaking kind of dynamic? So there are people who are pure engineers. They're like, I'm an engineer in and out, and that is all. I'm like, cool. What about engineering do you like? I love taking things apart, and I love putting them back together to make it function better. Great. We're going to do that. So in the space of diversity and inclusion, I had people tinker with different aspects of diversity and inclusion, because they talk about how it's so ambiguous. Like, what? What do you mean it's feelings? Like, how do I help with feelings? How do we measure for success? I'm like, one outcome is that people feel good. Another outcome, more importantly, is that we'll be able to extract the collective intelligence from those around you. You can do that. They're like, well, how can I do that? I'm like, let's play with it. Let's experiment. What are some problem hypotheses of what we're dealing with? How can you validate that? You talk to people, you do customer interviews. Okay. And then what? You propose solution hypotheses. then you experiment. They get to tinker on culture. And it's like doing it in a way that's super tangible. And I say, oh, by the way, everyone, it isn't, again, just to feel good and like to help the phantom others. It's really about how can you personally be in the driver's seat and incrementally or even dramatically create better outcomes with the people you work with. Raise your hand if you've ever worked with someone difficult. I was like, everyone can raise their hand. Okay, so what if I told you we could try some tactics and practices that can help to shift some of those interactions so they're not as difficult? I could do that. I was like, you could totally do that. Do it today. Now we're just going to do it more intentionally. So let's figure it out. So anyways, I'm going to pause there because I kind of rambled on.
Well, Erika, I think you gave us about 25 things to tee off of there. And I want to go back maybe a little to the earlier part of what you were describing on, who you are, is to talk about what you like to do. And it leads to paths and channels that may surprise yourself even. And you find people that have a common interest. I'll reflect on an experience. I started a business some years ago, and my wife just really doesn't like that I talk about what I'm interested in to anybody and everybody. But I found that in the business I was trying to build, if I did talk to anybody and everybody, all kinds of things would show up that I couldn't have imagined. And there was one example of a day where I was focused on luminescent ink. I wanted ink that would glow in the dark. And I talked about it wherever I was that day. And I met 3 different people who had something to do with glow in the dark ink. One guy in the airport terminal, one guy on the airplane, another guy at lunch. And just because I was, talking it up, the energy just, I don't know what happened, but it just came to me. And I had 3 new resources. But let me throw it to Curt, because you really were focused on this idea of the job title being in a box without regard to the other elements of somebody's life. And I know, Curt, you have a tremendous focus on that and some work that you're developing. Maybe you could pick up on it.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate everything you said. There is so much in there to unpack that I could go on forever. But the concepts for me that I just shot a podcast here before our meeting, and I do community-focused podcasts with people that are really activists within the community and are trying to really make change. And one of the things that really comes up, and I want to stay focused on your experience and where you come from versus the mass societal issue, right? That's much bigger than all of us. But one of the challenges I've had coming through in my career is we know that people create culture wherever they get together. We know that they create community wherever they get together. You talked a lot about opportunity. And are there ways that you are, I love the concept of middle out and bottom up. Are there ways that you're empowering people in those positions to really communicate out what they're interested in, what motivates them, what skills can they bring, what interests do they have, so that the people at the top can hear that and then actually take tangible actions to implement programs to support those people?
Yeah. So oftentimes in any case, like even in the volunteer role that I'm in with the soldier and family readiness group. So like wherever I go, I always try to understand who are the people who really care? Who are the people who want to do stuff? But for whatever reason, they're not doing it or they're not doing it yet. And then I try to understand who are the formal, like if you were to look at an environment from a lens of who possesses formal authority in that group dynamic. You can call it an organization, you can call it a community, whatever. There is formal authority, formal structure. And when we try to understand holistically, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And I do this at work as well. I say, leaders, what is it that we're trying to accomplish and why? So I'll take diversity and inclusion. Well, diversity and inclusion because it's the right thing to do, because we want people to feel like they have a sense of belonging. And we believe in the end of the day, it'll enable our business success. Great. That's the what. diversity and inclusion. The why is because business success and enabling and bringing out the best in others. If you stick to that as a vision, and then you try to understand, okay, now who are the other people within that system? And what is it that they're interested in doing to make that real? So it's not just a bunch of randomness. And that's the real aspect of where people, maybe some people who do focus on the formal aspects of the organization worry about is people going rogue. And it's like, no, it's not about people going rogue. It's about unleashing the talent so that the what and the why that you're trying to accomplish can be enabled by the people who figure out the how. How they choose to do that is really up to based off the individuals, their experiences, their skills, and the things that they want to go and do. And so for the people I've worked with who are in the middle, outer, bottoms up aspect, I see my role as being the connector. And my connecting making is really about, okay, like there is someone I work with today, and she has her background is in psychology, but she works in the customer advisory team. And she's like, I want to work in culture, but I just don't know how. I was like, okay, again, why do you want to do that? What do you want to do? What are your interests? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Where do you want to grow? And she shared all that. I said, okay, you have a psych background. You care about our customers. There's tons of opportunity for you to work on culture. You don't have to be dubbed in a role of culture PM or whatever. You can do it wherever you are, where you sit. She's like, I can? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, think about how you can even just adjust your customer engagements. And then say you personally experiment with it and you find opportunities that work for you or approaches that work for you. And then you could share it with your peers. You don't have to go all the way up the chain to make it go back down. You can influence right where you are. And the lens or the perspective I share with people to think about differently is think about the number of people you interact with in a single day. And think about the opportunities or ways in which you can influence them to either think about something differently or expand their horizon of how they view a certain situation. That is influencing, that is impact, that is change. And so,
Erika, and kind of tying with what Curt was driving at and what you've described that you do so well, are there mechanisms that you teach or others learn from you, or is it anything systematic about how to do what you're describing in terms of understanding where people are, what they want to do, and what they bring to the table?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about it more from a systemic point of view of, I guess, how people traditionally call programs that I guess are initiatives that I've kicked off in organizations. So one aspect is when I talked about experimentation earlier, that's an actual mechanism that is in place today. And I worked with my leaders to understand what is they care about and what they want us to do and why. And then I said, okay, employees, here are the things that we're looking to accomplish and what we're looking to do in a specific amount of time in the realm of diversity and inclusion. You tell me, so I crowdsourced, what are some of the top areas that would make a difference in the space of diversity and inclusion? And from there, we surfaced about 5 themes. So hiring, there's one around inclusive code reviews. There's aspects around inclusive peer interactions, so on and so forth. And then I was like, okay, division. There are these 5 themes, and we want you to come together and form into teams, sign up here, and you will be in distributed diverse teams. And from there, we want you all to workshop what the problems are in these themes. And then we take them through what we call the hypothesis progression framework. which you could find online. Actually made from people who authors in my division as well, created a book called Customer Driven Engineering. And and so they're tinkering with different themes within the diversity and inclusion space. And so systemically, I was the orchestrator of all of that. I am not solving for all of those problems. The different teams are, and these are distributed teams that may or may not have met each other or worked with each other on a regular working basis. And there are people who are coming up with like such creative solutions. And some of them are like, oh yeah, I'm a gardener, and but I'm an engineer by day, but I'm a gardener at home, and like coming up with really creative solutions to things around hiring, to things about relationship building, to things around community building. And then my role is about how do we then disseminate the information of what these teams are doing, both at the local level, so from them to share out with their peers on the ground, and then the things that I can do from a systemic top-down point of view, which are through employee town halls or all hands, so that you're covering both bases. And we're talking about it in different ways and in different aspects, but it's becoming real. And so I say for individuals like us on the call who usually find ourselves in positions around organization effectiveness, learning and development, or what have you, or consultation, that we have the opportunity to provide some recommendations for how to essentially facilitate matchmaking of problems and people to solve those problems.
I love that's great. I love the almost product management way that you approach it, because that's really where I've been the last 10 years, is on the product side of the world. So identifying KPIs, OKRs, whatever you want to call them, and really letting those drive towards an outcome. But one of the things I talked about, and we chatted about this earlier, but so we can actually empower people. And what I take when you talk about some of this stuff, the guy who's a programmer during the day, but a gardener at night, we're talking about authenticity at the end of the day and allowing people to be authentic. Mm-hmm. And I think authenticity at work is something that is necessary these days. But from your role, what is it that you do to say, because authenticity, quite frankly, I've seen can scare a lot of people at the top. How far do you let somebody how far do you empower somebody to have impact at their level and stretch out and spread out before it becomes a challenge to somebody above them? How do you manage that? And what are some of the processes or techniques that you use to kind of get people comfortable with that and actually use it for positive outcomes?
Yeah, so it's a great question, because I've been in conversations with, do we really want people to be like their true, authentic selves? And the answer is yes, to a certain extent, because for those of us who work in corporations, there are business standards of conduct, or standard business of conduct. And there are also in organizations, more often now than before, company values. And so it's really about somewhat conforming to some of those rules and regulations and ways of conducting yourself for the purposes of being able to work well together. And so what I recommend to individuals who either struggle with showing up as their authentic self is, there's one end of the spectrum of someone who just like, I completely cover up who I am out of fear of whatever it is. On the other hand, there's someone who's a little bit more radical of like, why can't I, share that I love guns? Like, and then it's like, okay, well, because I'm not so certain that sharing your love of firearms will help you be more effective in your job, versus the other one who's like completely covering, like, to the point of not being able to speak up. Like, you have to find a good balance. And what I share for individuals is show up in a way that allows you to interact with other people in ways that are civil, respectful, and in your own way, in how you choose to show up, but also realize and understand the impact that you have on others. And so if you decide to show up and coming guns blazing, figuratively, like in an aggressive way, will that result in working well with someone else? Most often it's not. But if you decide to show up in a respectful manner, like for me, I show up very informally. But that doesn't mean I don't know how to present to an executive audience, because I can. I just choose not to in specific settings and in certain groups that I know I can show up as my true authentic self, where I'm silly and I make jokes and I'm kind of goofy. But obviously when it's time for an executive presentation on the strategy, I need to show up credible. And therefore I'm a little bit more poised than I would be in an informal setting like this.
So, Erika, I've got to shift a little bit, and maybe this will take us toward the finish line of our conversation. My focus for the last year and a half has been around the theme of total rewards. And there's a contemporary way that organizations think about that. It's the package that you get to keep you motivated and productive. And it's financially driven. It may be perks. It may be a whole range of things that the corporation organization views as your rewards package. But from my own viewpoint, I think about rewards as what's rewarding in my life. And the organizational component is important, but I have broken out and done some things on my own path that have enriched me in a way that I could have never imagined from an experiential point of view. And to me, that is one of the great rewards that I have in my life. Now, how it relates to this conversation is that, you know, this world that we're in, which has a gig component to it, there's a free agent component to it, there's the sense that people want to be artisans in what they do, and the sourcing of how they become that person may come from a number of different places, including their current workday, which they might actually be using to get to where they want to go. So maybe you could share a reaction to that, and how, you know, Microsoft has a job to get done, but to what extent are individuals, you know, coming and going in order to pursue their own paths, or within? Maybe the path is within and they want to grow up, but maybe it's to do something here and then move on.
Yeah. Actually, when you were talking, what came to mind is Stephen Covey's work, and now he says, you know, begin with the end in mind. And I truly believe in that habit as he describes it, because, for example, I mean, we have one life. And I totally get the aspect of what is rewarding for you in your life. And that can't be defined by anyone but ourselves. And so when I think about my life, and to answer your question is, and I look at the place that I'm in now, and that's at Microsoft. And I could weigh out my options of, can I do my life's work here, or can I do it somewhere else? Right now, I can do it at Microsoft because I have the opportunity, I have the means, and I also have the skill set to also do that. And going back to that aspect of connection, I know how my work connects to my passion and purpose. And I also know that it is aligned to where Microsoft is trying to go as an organization, which is empowering the planet. And because I can see that line of sight, which I know is not always the case for everyone, from my own experience, I know that right now I can feel rewarded and fulfilled by being at Microsoft, because there is that alignment in my personal purpose right now and Microsoft's purpose. But if they are not aligned, they're disjointed, and I can't really buy into that vision, then I'm going to take my vision and my purpose and go somewhere else to see where I can fulfill that. Or can I do what you did? Start my own thing. And however I choose to express that, it might not even be in the business world. It could be in fashion, or it could be in pharmacy. I can find those opportunities for myself, or even reach out to my network to decide where I can go and do and fulfill my life purpose. So,
and to clarify, I actually do work in a corporate setting in financial services, in a world that I'm doing the work I do. I'm very good at, and I, like what I don't help move and change. But I have other things beyond it that
like this,
like this, and many other things.
Yeah.
Let me throw it back to you, Curt, if you had any final thoughts here.
I have a lot of thoughts, but I would take up the rest of your weekend talking about them. But
you said you wanted to go for a beer, so
yeah. What I do want to touch on quickly, though, is one of the things that this is not a political show or anything like that, and I know even me saying that, probably Robert's like, "Oh my God, what's he going to say now?" But but when the last president we had, who whether you supported him or not, one of the things that I was hoping would come out was there was this concept of the CEO president, and my hope was like, okay, if we have a CEO president, how do we incentivize companies, corporations to take back that mantle of on-the-job training? Because I came from a poor background, and almost all of my training has been on the job and work that I've done, and that's how I've progressed through my career. And I've been really heartened to see things like a lot of the Google trainings that are out there now, a lot of the work that Udacity and these companies are doing. And I'm curious, one of the upsides of really understanding the authentic person that works there is, we think about like marriages, and marriages, you're supposed to have one, right? Some of us have more than one. Some of us never get married. But the idea with the marriage is that it's lifelong. But we know, if we're realistic about jobs, most people in companies, it's not a lifelong thing anymore. You're there for some number of years and you move. So I'm curious, are you seeing at Microsoft, for instance, because that's where you are they identifying, supporting, again, that outcome, right? You said the Stephen Covey, tying it to the outcome you want. Is there support mechanisms you're seeing, or are we supporting that or strengthening that to identify, okay, look, this person's here now, they're doing a good job. 5 years from now, they may not be, but let's give them some opportunities to actually learn the skills that are going to help them towards that outcome that they want.
Yeah, what I've seen in my experience is that lots of corporations are, in fact, leaning towards lifelong learning, is how we call it. And when we talk about lifelong learning, it's really about what are some of those transferable skills that we can take. And also there's some hard skills that folks can learn, can pick up. And where I work, it's really focused on this aspect of growth mindset. And so it isn't just linear, like you're on this path and, here's your ladder and this is the only path that you could take. It's really about, no. What are some of the things that you like? What are you doing right now? Where do you want to grow? And how could we as a system provide opportunities and options for you to exercise to then master some skills and increase your level of proficiency in maybe areas that you aren't proficient in yet. And so there is a high aspect of motivation to get people around us to think about learning in a different way. And it's not solely to just go on a single path. It's really about like, how do you broaden your horizon? Because that'll also allow you to gain different perspectives or different ways of looking at a situation, and ultimately lead us to better innovation when we think of the diversity of perspectives that we can put into what we do on a day-to-day basis. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but that's how we think about it. And it's really exciting.
Yeah, I think that's great, actually, what you said at the end there, which I just ruined by cutting you off. But that was kind of my point, was that oftentimes if somebody's, I'm speaking personally here, if somebody works in IT or development and they're really interested in being a musician, oftentimes if companies will support that music aspect of them, that growth aspect, that not only creates loyalty and a better mindset for that individual, but that's the person that's going to come in and say, hey, we could change the startup sound because this would be a much more positive key to put it in, or something of that nature. So you touched on all of that, but yeah, no, that's wonderful. I'm going to stop there because I'll keep rambling and let Robert tie it off. Also for you, if there's anything you wanted to put out there, places where people can find you, things like that, feel free to do so.
LinkedIn, Instagram. Just kidding.
Well, Erika, thank you for joining us today. I think that we certainly found the common threads of what our aim is with this conversation, with what you do and the way you think. And having known that about you already, you reinforced it so many ways in this conversation. The casual approach you take to important points, and the ways in which individuals can find their spot within and beyond, and how organizations can help see that. That kind of explains our who's there concept. So who's there, just to tie that together, is who's there? Who am I? What am I all about? Where am I going? And then does my organization know who's in there to tap into that resource? And you summed it, you tied it to that so expertly, and we appreciate it. So thank you for joining us today. Your last word.
Well, I say sky's the limit and anything's possible. It's just a matter of finding other people to help expand the possibilities. So
Excellent.
thank you.